How we go, everyone, and welcome back to 67 for a moment. Another day, another dollar, as I used to say. So it's going to be extremely controversial. First of all, because it's me. If you don't know me, I'm Nelson Pari. I am pretty famous around for this kind of shenanigans that I do, talking about things that you will most of the time not really seeing around 67 Pall Mall, like natural wines. But I would say that the interest keep on growing about it. People wants to know about it, and most of the time, people thinks that I'm going to take a sort of a Shoreditch approach to it. Instead, it is a bit more of a mixture between the classic Sage and Wild style with a 67 Pall Mall view of it. So it has been a great success. I think it's the third time that I'm doing this. I'm not going to be alone, but that's something for later. I just want to, first of all, thank you all for being around. As always, question on the go. So I will tell you straight away, guys. Please open up all your bottles, the little bottles, if you have the kit, because these guys needs to breathe. So especially we are gonna change the order as well. I'm not gonna tell you why. I mean, one guy is gonna tell you why, and that guy is clearly not me. So I want to start straight away with few points. Straight away, boom. Stan, what do you think of the natural wine movement? I'm gonna talk about it straight away now. In a way, just answering to you directly, Stan, I am a big fan, but I think we need to put some stops to certain things. Okay, so there are a few things that I'm going to talk about, and you will see literally every single. I mean, there are a few things that I do and talk about it when it comes to natural wine, but it comes from my place, my view. If I'm opening my cellar, most of the time, I do drink natural wines at home. And the guy that is going to join me today is one of my biggest friends in the wine trade, and we studied together for a bit, and we shared so much love for natural wine. And I started being interested in wine through natural wines, so it's a bit weird. And some of the people from 67 remember me as the guy who tend to suggest Radicon or Grafner straight away in, just because I wanted to see what happened. I had put in the list a few natural wines over the time, and most of the ones that you are drinking at the club, maybe they're natural and you don't know about it. I mean, if you take in account biodynamics and natural, Romane Conti is a natural wine. So there is like a huge and a broad spectrum when it comes to it. But let me start with what I think would be the major point. So guys, these are 5 things you heard about natural wines. Every one of us, at least once, have heard these 5 sentences. The first one is that they all smell like shit. That everyone has heard this phrase. I remember the first run that I did of this masterclass. I remember Max, if you remember Max Zampa, the waiter in the lounge, I think one of the legends of hospitality in the UK. And after, Dorchester, great curriculum. I remember he came in, he's like, as soon as you're doing natural wine videos, made like shit. And so he knew as well that that was everything that people knows about it. The second one is that like they don't give you an headache the day after because there's no presence of sulfite in it. The third one is that they cannot age as they turn quickly into vinegar. 4 is just a momentary trend for Shoreditch hipster. And 5, all the great wines of the world are not natural. Okay, so I guess please write in the chat if you heard these sentences before, or because I am gonna bet my money that some of you probably actually said one of those sentences. And guys, I'm just gonna start straight away. I said in the past all 5 of these sentences many times to many people. So that's what I'm gonna say. So the problem is, Michele, all of that in your presence. That's the thing. That's most likely. So what is natural wines, ladies and gentlemen? So natural wine technically doesn't exist. Okay, so there's a, like when we study, we always put a sort of like legislation system. Like when we're talking about a specific wine, we're thinking about its AOP and the rules. So we just go maybe on Guildsum, we check on the compendium, and we see what are the laws for it. At the current time, there is no sign in a court of law regarding natural wines except the Enoteca Bulzoni. It technically now does exist in France. I was going to do it at the end. So what happened is that, like, since and still, I don't know if it's AOP'd yet. So that's the reason why, but I'm going to go to it later. So the only piece of legislation in a court of law before this new French thing that I'm going to talk about at the end was the Enoteca Bulzoni versus the Ministry of Agriculture of Italy. What happened is that, like, the Enoteca Bulzoni wrote a sign to the entry that said, in this place, we only sell natural wines. So people started to line up to Enoteca Bulzoni to actually buy the wines because they felt that the wines were better just because the sign said, here, the wines are natural. What happened is that, like, all the other enotecas around, all the other wine shops, they start saying, look, what is this all about? I think this is something that you are using just as a scam. And they brought them a series of wine bars. They brought Enoteca Bulzoni against the Ministry of Agriculture on the sign, on the specific sign of saying, here, there are natural wines. What happened is that they lost. Because technically, how can you say that that specific wine is more natural than something else? If I'm going to go as far as saying that if you're using a chemical, that chemical comes from technically stuff that you can actually produce in nature. So that's natural. The example that I use all the time to understand better natural wines in a legislation sense, there is a book, I don't remember the name of the guy, I'm sorry, but there's a book called Sapiens. If someone is saying to me, look, you are in an island alone, there's one book that you can take with you, Sapiens is probably going to be in my choices. It's basically the history of humanity from, the first human, let's say, races, the Neanderthal versus, all the other things, till the research of happiness. Is an incredible book. And this guy did like a TED talk in which he said, if you take a human body and you just open it up, you're going to find a heart, you're going to find kidneys, you're going to find the lungs, but you know what you're not going to find? Human rights. And that's pretty much what is the deal with natural wine. Because when we're talking about natural wines, pretty much we're talking about the rights of the wine, of agricultural rights, okay? And these things are pretty much based on my second point, which is interference. So technically, when we are talking about natural wines, we are referring to something that has minimal or no interference at all. And just on this line, it can actually be slightly tricky, because then at the point, what happens is that pretty much all the time, many people have set this like line of interference to different levels. This is why when we talk about regulating bodies, loads of like discussions and like really confusion comes in, because how this thing starts in a nutshell. They all start are regulating bodies, like the growers are putting themselves together, and technically what happens is that they just go and they say, okay, these are the rules. Then some of these growers is just going to use a tiny bit less of what he has been prescripted, and then he starts saying, but I'm more natural than you guys because I use way less. Then you will have someone that doesn't want to use copper, so that is going to go against the biodynamic scene. So they cannot get the certification, but technically they could be even more natural because they don't use it. And so as you can see, and literally, if you even look at this history of Vin Natur from Paolo Bea, you will see in how many grower association from one single association, everybody's like fighting so much, right? That they start like, I think, thousands of growers association. And that instead of like, giving more clearance about what natural wine could be, it actually creates a sort of extra confusion. And I usually say these things. When people are taking me and they say, okay, Nelly, find me a funny way to make me understand natural wines. And I'm thinking that natural wines are technically like vegans. Every single vegan is completely right, okay? But I want to have my steak. That's the point. That's pretty much the point that I have on trying to explain in a nutshell, okay? Technically, who is doing natural wines most of the time is using agriculture correctly. And I'm going to show you some bits. I'm going to talk about some experiences that I've seen, especially in Bordeaux recently. But what I want to make a point is that everything comes down to one single thing, and is trust. Because you don't have, let me just do the France bit. So France, exactly, went out now with Vin Method Nature. I don't know, probably Roman knows even more than me about it. It is a classification that, as he wrote in the chat, it leaves a lot of room for interpretation. Why? Because I don't know what Roman thinks, we're going to ask him later. They actually, like the standards are like the sets of the sulfur, or even the rules are pretty open. And is a sort of like, I actually read just a tiny bit of it, and it seems like is a sort of like step extra towards organic. What I think they're trying to do in there is that they start seeing that many producers are taking that kind of road, and it's becoming really, really hard to put all these great wines in that sort of like IGT character. You know, these wines cannot be Van de Table anymore. Okay, you cannot have like one of the best wine in France and have it as a Van de Table. And the French are always been super intelligent about it. So what I think they've done is that they need to make a sort of like quality system for it, because as we're going to see, even detecting natural wines, giving points to natural wines is a mess. But trust is the main point. When you go to a producer or you drink a producer, you do trust him to use as less interference ever. Let me give you an example. I was in Italy, and I was with a friend of mine visiting one of the most rumored producer of the center of Italy. And what happened is that this friend of mine just sneaked in the cellar while I was chatting with the producer, and he found a bag full of sulfuric acid in powder. I don't know what usually uric acid, you know, why do you have acid in powder in your cellar and you're a natural winemaker? I guess that you're not using it to clean your teeth, right? So that's the point. Sometimes there are loads of people that are claiming that they are natural, but they're not. And I am one of those kind of old school guy that I think, like, you know, I've seen many producers that they are starting doing this bloody, oh, you know, we're doing this tank is completely natural, but this one that is right near to it is not. What's the point then? I mean, how can you just control one piece of your room with indigenous yeast and the other one with, I mean, there's no point in many of these like people jumping on the bandwagon, but I'm going to talk about that as well. So I just wanted to say that apart from all this new classification and what is going to happen, trust is still, for me, the best thing that you can use as an assessment for natural wine. And trust comes also with the sommelier, you know, like trusting the sommelier that is going to serve your wine and telling the story, right? So let's move on. So technically, I'm going to go really quickly through viticultures and winemaking. So first thing, plants are communicating each other via roots, okay? It is actually a super recent thing. I don't think it actually has even 10 years or something around, is in that kind of block between 2008 and 2013 that they've been studying that actually plants are fighting each other, especially vines, all the time, especially, you know, for nitrogen and potassium and stuff. So what happens is that every plant is technically against each other, especially when they're like super, you know, high density. But what happens, this is this scientific study that they did, is that when the plants are seeing that a vine is near to die, they actually share via the roots the nutrients that the plant that is dying needs to keep it fighting, okay? And this is extraordinary if you think about it, and it makes you think about one thing. In a tablespoon of soil, there is more bacteria than people on Earth in a single tablespoon. There is, and this here comes the point where if you don't have biodiversity, you can have no life and you can have no soil. If you have the historical, like for me, it's an historical book already, on natural wines. I remember the name of the master of wine. It's going to come up in my mind really soon. She's the master of wine that organized Raw. You will see there's a picture of a wine seen through a microscope. One is a natural wine. The other one is one with, you know, classic selected strain yeast. Isabelle Geron, here we go. It was on the tip of my tongue. Thank you, Roman. And, you know, you can see in this picture that actually in the natural wine one, there are way, way, way more microbes and bacteria. But it's something like crazy. Like one seems like, you know, a single spotlight. You know, when you look at the night and you see a couple of stars. The other one was literally like people swimming in an ocean. It was like insane, like shitloads of stuff happening. And that's something that needs to be addressed. That all this biodiversity and life in the vineyard, all these, you know, like trying not to, you know, destroy the soil. It is actually something that we need to take care of. And there's an example that for me is absolutely great, even in deciding the specific piece of land. What's happening in Bordeaux, and it was a Chateau d'Ozac, and the guys who invented, you know, the Bordeaux mixture. What happened is that, like, they were saying about, you know, like maybe the going down of quality in recent times. And what's happening is that, like, back in the day, who were there at the time in the 1855 classification, what they did is that they knew a huge difference between Grand Cru vineyards and non-Grand Cru vineyards. Nobody planted in non-Grand Cru areas for one reason. The reason is that technically Grand Cru area are the ones in which the biodiversity is complex enough to, let's say, eliminate extra problems that you might get on the singular vineyard. When they actually started to expand, the new vineyards that were outside the Grand Cru vineyards, every time they got affected by powdery mildew or whatever other thing, they just move super quickly towards the Grand Cru vineyards. So the soil always gives you a real clear identity of where you should plant stuff and what to do with it. So it is fascinating that these things are coming out now, especially from areas that have been using, like, you know, pesticides and stuff like that. I mean, there's people that are talking about soil biodiversity in Prosecco. This is how crazy we're taking this stuff, okay? So, like, literally, even a couple of years ago, nobody was thinking about talking about this, right? And now it's getting to be a major point, and this major point is becoming essential to actually understand what's going on wine and what is going to happen, because it's something that we need to take seriously. So, guys, there are majorly 3 types of natural farming. I just want to make it really simple, because if we're going to go on details, we're just going to become the natural wine lovers, okay? And we maybe want to do that, but not today. Because if not, we're just going to fight about who's more organic, who's more biodynamic, or stuff like that. In a single way to explain it, organic is a treatment practice that restricts or prohibits the use of pesticide, fungicide, synthetic fertilizer while promoting plant mineral-based product. So what it means, in a generic way, a producer is organic when, oh, there's a problem. I'm now going to fight it without the use of these products. That's in a simple key. Biodynamic is a prevention system, okay? That is based on polyculture, animal husbandry, that includes preparation based on plants, minerals, and manures that stimulates microbial life while improving soil fertility. So the difference between organic and biodynamic in a huge nutshell is organic. I have a problem, I'm not going to solve it in a less, like, heavy way without the users of all these chemicals. In biodynamic, you start from the top, making sure that stuff never happens somehow. Biodynamic, okay, when we talk about biodynamic, okay, if you don't know what biodynamic is, it is that thing that talks about the connection and the moon and the stars with the planet, gravity, you know, the waves of the moon. I truly suggest you that you should read the Introduction of Biodynamic by Nicolas Joly. And that book is going to give you an idea of how crazy you can get with this. Apart from the classic preparations that you heard, you know, the classic one when you take, you know, the cow shit and start spraying around, or, you know, I need to take like a cow's horn and then put it under the earth. And we can get to the point in which certain people have created their wineries following the biodynamic early Romans methods, which is basically you take some lamps, you make them go around some specific areas, then you kill them and you check the movements of the liver. If the liver goes according to the plan, that should be a sign that God is telling you that you should do something in that piece of land because it's sacred. And there are some people around the world that they are crazy enough to do it, and Nicolas Joly is talking about it, and it's crazy. And I think that he tried as well. The third one is permaculture. Okay, permaculture is a bit crazy, but is what people call as lazy winemaking. I heard many times that, I mean, in the world it's called permaculture. At 67 Pall Mall, it might be called lazy winemaking. Basically, is a system. Basically, you set up your vineyards, and then you make sure that the system is self-sustaining or self-sufficient. And basically, you try to touch as less as possible. So that's it. I set it up. Let's leave it there. And I'm just going to check it. Okay? Not tilling, no irrigation, no herbicides. I'm just going to do some checks. I'm going around, just checking how it's going. Maybe I see somebody doing some green harvesting sometimes, but not even that sometimes. In the most extreme situations, people are actually even not doing any of that. And there are some extreme cases. Some of them are really famous. We're going to drink, I think, La Macchiona actually uses permaculture. And even Frank Cornelissen, which has been like one of the most prized wines from Etna, is actually made of permaculture. Winemaking. Winemaking is really easy. Usually, you know, the classic no filtration, no fining, literally everything that moves the wine in a sort of like too, let's say, violent way is completely taken off. In this way, technically, if the wine has less movement and has been treated less, it should have more capacity to age, technically, they say. The other thing, which is what everybody knows, is indigenous yeast and spontaneous fermentation. Whatever happens, happens. So there are some wines that are really famous that we drink in certain vintages, and they have like this sometimes unpleasant residual sugar for us, and sometimes they are completely bone dry. That's because for a natural winemaker, they are like a perfect representation of the vintage, and there's nothing that you can do. I might have my doubts on that though. There's one thing that I wanted to put in line, because when we talk about natural wines, everyone is talking about sulfites like crazy. And it's weird because for me, sulfites are really the last thing that I will talk about technically in natural wines. I know that some people are actually allergic to it, and that's a problem that they can actually solve by drinking natural wines. But technically, what I want to say is like sulfites, I just wrote it for myself. They're an additive that can take form in a gas, liquid, powder, or tablet. They're used at the beginning of fermentation to eliminate wild yeast, to then inoculate chosen strain, or to stabilize wine at bottling. So most of the bottles that you drink can last that long just because of sulfites. Okay, so we don't have to be Nazis about it, okay? Because people are just like, oh my God, I don't use any sulfites, so I'm better than you. No, it's just a choice, okay? For me, at least. Everything that I'm saying is my vision on it, okay? Another thing, a label needs to say contains sulfites at more than 10 mg per liter. Industrial use is 350. So sometimes, I remember there were people talking to me about sulfites a lot, and they just like, oh man, I can really smell the sulfites. And I was just like, man, I believe it's bullshit. I don't think you can actually do it. And then at a certain point, I start feeling them in certain bottles. And it's disgusting when you actually open a bottle and the only thing that you can smell is just sulfites. And at that point, if I need Sulfites are natural byproduct, John. They basically, what happens is that like during fermentation, sulfites are actually produced. I don't remember the amount of sulfites that fermentation can produce, and it depends a lot on the heat. So technically, like if you go to certain places where people like literally are boiling the wine up, you will have mostly more sulfites because that's how they came out. The thing is that like we need to find the balance because we need our bottles, you know, especially on expensive bottles, because that's my point. When I'm talking about natural wines, I want to make sure that you understand that my point is yes towards the general wine scene, natural wine scene, but what I want to focus on is the fine wine league of natural wines. I'm talking Emilio Pepe, I'm talking Thierry Germain, I'm talking, you know, Pheasant Years, so some of the guys we were drinking today. This is fine wine territory, okay? So remember that they do eliminate risk factors, and that's something really important. Another thing, which is really important to me, is wine faults. And you guys, towards the years at 67, you've been asking me about it for so long. Let's go one by one. I think there are three that I feel are more important than others. Brettanomyces, which is a yeast that is present in the cellar and create, you know, the kind of farmyard taste. Oxidation, and I will add even reduction. You know, oxidation is when, you know, there's a contact with air. So the wine has this kind of oxidized, there's this thing, right? That especially in natural wine, if the wine is reductive, so it doesn't have seen much air, like, and you know, we tend to say, you know, it's just reductive because it's natural. And if it's oxidized, many people are saying, oh no, it's just in a non-oxidative style. So most of the even low-level, mid-level producer are just like using this thing as like, oh, you know, if the wine is oxidized, it's not because it's a mistake, it's because I'm cool enough. And volatile acidity is expressed in gram per liters, and basically is that kind of smell of nail polish. The problem is that volatile acidity, for me, is a problem of quantity of volatile acidity. If you go to certain places, I always use the example of Montalcino. And in the example of Montalcino, for example, if you have, I'll give a simple example. If you have 0.3 of volatile acidity, basically the wine is incredibly clean, okay? But flavors, especially primary, are non-moving. You cannot feel that kind of Sangiovese flavor. If the volatile acidity is coming up to 0.6, is another kind of game. And you start feeling, for real, the taste of Brunello. And that's really interesting because at a certain point, any of those three wine faults can be used as an example of sort of like, okay, I want these kind of flavors. I'm going to use this technique to develop those flavors. And the point is that as in life, to have some good, you need to have some bad as well. Because if you don't have the bad, how you can understand the good? Sometimes it's not true when it comes to wine. When it comes to natural wine, it might be though. And I'm gonna tell you what is my point. For example, when I feel Brettanomyces, I think it's a wine fault and that the winemaker wasn't good enough. This is what I think sometimes, okay? But then, when I drink wines like La Stoppa, that we're gonna drink today, I do love it. I do love it. So, and there are certain, you know, like old Italian wines, and basically, and even old Latour. If you open like the old Latours from the 30s to even to the early 60s, 70s, you will find Brett in some of the vintages. So, I mean, what is really the point? Oxidation, let's talk about certain vintages, you know, on Domaine Lefleve, right? I mean, it is in oxidative style. I think about the champagne. I mean, what can we do? This is why, and this is an answer also to the question that I saw from John about sulfites, because there is no clear thing. Like, yeah, it is a natural wine if it does 45 mg. Maybe not because the winemaking is different. Maybe not because, you know, somebody has done some games in the vineyard or some shady stuff in the cellar. Or, you know, maybe somebody have put it, I don't know, 60 mg of sulfites, but the wine is completely natural. You know, this is the thing. It seems that sometimes for a producer is a sort of a game. The less sulfites you use, and the more natural you are. The more breath, the more oxidation, the more volatile you have, and the more the wine is natural. For me, it comes to 2 points. The first one, this is for me, and I've been inspired by that by an article that I think Ronan has been asked for. I think The Guardian was, I don't remember, or Telegraph. I clearly don't remember about what journal it was, about natural wines, and he said, to me, still, when I'm going out and I buy a Sancerre, I want to drink a Sancerre. So everything that comes extra is great, but I want to feel the grape variety. It has to be a Sauvignon Blanc in the Loire. But first of all, it needs to be a Sauvignon Blanc. Because if I'm just drinking the Loire, then we can start a fight together. And probably me and Roman, we're going to do one. I don't know what he thinks about it. We're going to see. And but this is my point of view. From a 67 Palmar point of view, I think that first we need still to come to the variety. And the other thing is that I'm taking these wine faults up to winemaking techniques and how good a winemaker is. And again, it all comes down to trust, right? So I'm trusting, when I'm drinking in Marroneto, I trust Alessandro Mori to do a wine that is worth the 100 points that he takes every year, right? And every time we open them, you might like it or you might not like it. It is incredibly clean and is top winemaking. At the certain times when we're going to drink La Stoppa today, maybe we're going to drink it even tonight, but you're going to see specific things, okay? And it is a wine that is full of these wine faults, but still there is a sense that connects them to the variety. And that's something that includes culture and history of a specific thing. So that's my overview about it. Fuck it, let's drink a bit. So are you guys ready? Please, anything that you need, that you want to share, always Q&A, always the chat. So ladies and gentlemen, let me introduce to you one of my guidance on natural wine, which is Mr. Roman Pawar from Le Cave de Pirem. Ciao, Roman, man.
Ciao, Nelson.
Yeah,
Hi,
Roman,
everybody.
we did WSET 3 together, so it's great to be back together on this. It's amazing.
No, thanks for inviting me, Nelson. And I think you've done a really nice introduction. I think as you can all tell by what he's covered, it's a really slippery topic, natural wine, and it's, you know, been the subject of a huge amount of debate. So it's really difficult to kind of condense everything into such a concise thing. But I think Nelson's done a really great job there and really brought up, you know, I think a lot of interesting points that we can develop, as he said in the Q&A and the chat. Please keep any questions and stuff coming, because yeah, I mean, I think sadly for me, I don't have any of the wines with me, but luckily Nelson does, and his palate is much better than mine, so he can talk about how they're showing today.
No, usually we're both great drinkers, but today I'm just gonna take the pity of drinking the wines with you guys. So
fantastic. So yeah, I mean, you know, I'm gonna talk a little bit, you know, about the producers and about the wines and about how they kind of came to work the way that they work and the decisions that they make in the winemaking. And how it impacts on the wines, but really it's a really nice selection that that Nelson has picked. I think really you're going to be tasting some of the greats of natural wine. So this is cheating a little bit. I think a lot of people spend a lot of time drinking a lot of really questionable natural wines. But I think there's definitely some challenges in here, but there are also wines which, whether you label them as natural or not, you can recognize them as just fantastic wines.
that's it.
You know, and I think that's actually the most important thing at the end of it, is that really what we want is to drink great wine. It's nice to know that the producers are working in a way that's that is, you know, responsible to the land that they're tending, and that is with a view to trying to express as much of that as they can. But it's another way of working with wine, and you get great wines produced in conventional ways, and you get terrible wines produced in conventional ways. You get great wines produced in natural ways, and terrible wines produced in natural ways. So I don't think
I do agree.
You know, being natural is a free pass to being a good wine. You still have to hunt, and I think maybe a little harder, as Nelson said, because ultimately, no matter what classifications they come up with, I think Nelson totally hit the nail on the head, that it's about trust. It's about knowing the producer, seeing how they work, seeing the spirit of what they're doing, and understanding that that is something that they are dedicating themselves in a particular way to bring an honest representation of their place, their grapes, their vintage, and to bring something authentic to the table. And I think that's not always the case, even if people are working without additives and without manipulation. The authenticity can be a bit questionable because it can be basically jumping on a bandwagon, this Shoreditch hipster kind of vibe, this vibe where it has a bit of a punk rock attitude to it, as I was saying to Nelson yesterday, that people are just like, cool, we've got grapes, we've got some cheap land in the south of France, we're going to throw them together and we're going to hope for the best, and if there's anything wrong with it, we'll just say that's natural wine, which I think is, you know, hugely detrimental, even though I'll admit I've drunk some wines that I've enjoyed that were made with exactly this kind of attitude.
Me too, man. Me too.
But at the end of the day, you know, I think it's a very different kind of project than the producers that we're going to be tasting today. So, yeah.
No, yeah, guys, again, I'm just going to answer 2 quick questions. Please use the Q&A and let me know, because I know that some of you have the kit. I just want to know what you think about the wines. Just quickly, for John, if he's tasting the varietal, should really taste like there is a standard for natural wine? No, but I think it should be. Like, in my way, that should be like a thing that has to be there all the time. It doesn't really happen, and you'll see in this tasting, it doesn't happen all the time. I think that it would be great just if on top of all these fantastic flavors, wine comes in. But I choose these wines with Roman exactly to make some of the points. And quickly, for Kevin that asked about Nicolas Joly that farms in extreme way, but then he put it like 50 mg of sulfur. That's what I'm talking about. It's confusing. What is natural wine? What is not? I mean, you know that when we're talking about Nicolas Joly, we're talking about the star of it. But you know, how can you say that? Because many people, you know, is really specific about things, and that's the problem with you. Like with that question that you asked, you actually nailed the point. The point is, how can you say who's going to decide? Because there's no regulation. Again, do you trust that Nicolas Joly is a biodynamic winemaker? Yes, I do, with all my heart. And that's the end of the point. Unfortunately, maybe, but this is technically what the point is in this singular time. I just want to start straight away, guys, with the first wine. Yeah, you see, Michel, because that's on the Chablis that tastes like Chablis. That's exactly my point. Roman, tell me about this wine, and then I'll tell you why I choose this wine. I wanted this wine to be here specifically for a reason. But please guide us through.
So here we have a wine made by Alice and Olivier Demour. They met in Chablis, working in different domains. Olivier was born and bred in Chablis. Alice is from Jura, but they both studied enology in Dijon, and they met working in Chablis, and in the 90s they started making a little bit of wine together in Saint-Brie, and then they acquired first a couple of parcels of Aligoté and a little parcel of Sauvignon Blanc from Saint-Brie. Then they expanded to Chitry, and then they got some parcels in Chablis as well. But during their time, they have small holdings, and they've had some pretty tough vintages. So in certain years, they have outsourced grapes. Usually it began with Chablis, but then in vintages where Chablis was obliterated and they couldn't get organically farmed grapes, they had friends from all over. So they've made wines under this label, Vendangeur Masqué, from everywhere from Alsace to Roussillon, and blends in between and all kinds of stuff. But they have this amazing capacity to put the same kind of elegance and texture in every wine they make, whether it's made from Roussanne, or whether it's made from Riesling, or whether it's made from Aligoté, or of course Chardonnay. This is an interesting one because this parcel, so they have the Négoce label on this, so this is technically bought fruit, but they've actually acquired this parcel. So from 2019, this will be a domain wine. So the parcel, they've used this parcel for quite a few years now for Chablis. It's farmed organically. It's pretty young vines, about 15 years old. And yeah, I mean, their winemaking method is always super simple and super honest. So they were very fixated on trying to get the most gentle pressing that they could. So they use a really delicate pneumatic press, and that for them extracts the kind of the in the most gentle way the kind of purity of the fruit. Large barrels of varying ages, and usually around 8 months on the lease, to develop everything. But no fining, no filtration, no sulfur at all during the vinification. A little bit is added then at bottling if they see necessary. But I mean, usually it's about 10 to 20 milligrams of sulfur added at bottling, just to preserve the wines. But for me, they are my favorite producer in Chablis. I just think they have an incredible touch with the way that they produce the wines. And in terms of varietal character, region character, I'm not tasting the wine now, but I have no doubts that that nobody would mistake this wine as coming from anywhere else.
I'll tell you like a bit of, this is what I do. During my things, I always talk about my private life. This is what I do. This is why my masterclasses are being so famous. And me and Federico, we chat about, you know, romances and stuff. So what happened to me is that, like, this is why I put up this wine specifically. Okay, you know, when you are in high school, when I was in high school, I was pretty much the rocker and everybody was like already, you know, a lawyer deep inside. And it was great for them, but I was completely the outcast of the group. And what happened is that, like, after my music / wine career, I had a few of my female classmates calling me back and said, "Oh, can we go out?" and stuff like that. And I remember one was in London. She called me out and I was like, fucking hell, I'm a legend. So I went to Terroir with this mate of mine. And out of nowhere, I found this Chablis. And I drank it. And I think this is the first Chablis in my life when I completely had in my mind the idea of oyster shell or minerality. It was the first one. I mean, all the great Chablis that we drink at 67 had that thing, but I remember clearly on this one that, like, if you guys feel on the palate it has maybe that sort of like, not volatile acidity, but it has that kind of, I don't want to say vinegary aftertaste, but I think that that tiny bit of that thing is moving so much of this so-called minerality. If you put now, like, this is what I usually do. Just, you know, make the wine go around the glass a lot and then just drink it. And the best thing, especially on these wines, is that, like, when you smell the glass back, you will actually taste the minerality. And this wine, every time I drank it and I just put my nose back on the glass, there's loads of minerality. Call it oyster shell, call it, you know, rocky thing, I don't know. You took Grand to Terroir. This is crazy. I thought I was crazy. You are crazier than me, Michel. I mean, I know you for a long time, but that's even beyond the capability of my brain. I don't know what happened. That's how coronavirus started. I don't know. That is crazy. You took Grant to Terroir. I'm gonna ask him about it. Grant, wait for my phone call, man.
Oh my God.
I'm gonna bring Grant to Terroir. I'm gonna go with Mark now. That's what I'm gonna do. I'm gonna go with Mark to Terroir, and we're gonna drink the nastiest stuff that I can find. But it's gonna hurt because Terroir is actually great at all great wines. But guys, do you feel? Let me know in the chat if you actually feel this minerality thing even slightly enhanced, because this is what I feel, especially on this producer. Thank you very much, Roman. It was great to have this wine here.
Amazing.
Let's move on. And now we're gonna move to, for me, it's a classic of my cellar, but I drank it first with Roman. And I remember that, you know, every time Roman is suggesting me something new, now I'm not anymore one of those natural, you know, 100% guys. You know, I'm one of you guys. I'm a 67 Pall Mall guy. I like to see my Haute Brions in line, if you know what I mean. And then he said, Nelly, just sat down for a second and let's have a taste of this. And I was literally blown away. So Roman, tell us more about the second wine.
So I also have a bit of a personal story with this wine because it was
There you go.
actually the very first natural wine fair that I ever attended. I was just getting into natural wine and learning about it and really developing my interest in wine because of this before we met. And it was Vin Nature in Vicenza. It was a beautiful wine fair, amazing producers, beautiful venue, everything. But I tasted a few wines and I had a big question mark over my head. I was like, I don't know about this. Some of these wines taste really weird and, don't really taste like wine so far. And on the other hand, I tasted some wines that were very correct tasting, but I felt, weren't so different from what I understood wine to be. So I was like, what's the big difference? Either this wine is really weird or it's just the same as every other wine I've tasted. So what's the big deal? Until I came to the table of Andreas Ceppe and I tasted his wine and he said, very quietly, he's a very meek, kind of quiet guy. And that's a picture of his brother, by the way. And he poured me this wine, he said, Sauvignon Blanc. And I tasted it and it completely, I'd never tasted any Sauvignon Blanc like it. I'd never tasted as everything then that he then told me about the soil and the vineyards and everything just rushed into my thinking. And so I think this was a very decisive wine for me in terms of bringing me onto the natural wine path and really showing me what is possible when you have such an attentive, detailed kind of winemaker. So yeah, I mean, I think this comment in the chat right now that it's hard to pick it out as a Sauvignon Blanc, I think that's true, but I think that is due to the winemaking choices that are typically made with Sauvignon Blanc. So I think in order to emulate a style of wine that existed when the world was cooler, basically, and also to pick out these notes of grassiness and these kind of really green, fresh sort of notes, people pick Sauvignon Blanc far too early. And so you get this kind of bell pepper and you get these grassy notes, the ones that usually jump out to us, and even, more citrusy gooseberry and things like that, things that jump out are not necessarily characteristics of fully ripe Sauvignon Blanc. So when you start to get a more ripe one, and even in the Loire Valley these days, riper Sauvignon Blancs really develop more of these kind of opulent, stone fruity, kind of melon kind of characters, and a lot more expressiveness without that aggressive, almost kind of hoppiness that you'll get with a lot of New World Sauvignon Blancs, and aren't so loaded with all these kind of piracy. So I have since encountered now quite a few natural producers who are very conscientious about waiting for the ripeness, some of them extending the ripeness. So, for example, the Sancerre that was under the microscope in the picture that Nelson was talking about, I mean, nobody would recognize this as a Sancerre. If you tasted it, it tastes like mango juice. It's even thick and weighty because he actually waits so long that many of the grapes become botrytized and all of that before he makes the wine. That I think is maybe a little extreme. But I think, in this case, we're in Styria, we're in the south of Austria, kind of bordering Slovenia. We're at about 500 meters of altitude. So in terms of, the summers do get pretty warm, but generally it's kind of a cooler growing climate. So you would expect it, and there is a lot of conventionally made Sauvignon Blanc from this part of the world, and it does have more of these grassy gooseberry kind of notes and stuff like that. But in this case, I think it's really, that's where it gets confusing about whether a wine should taste like its place or its variety, because I think we have also been taught to think that a region or a grape should have a particular taste, but sometimes that is due to a tradition of winemaking choices. But in any case, I've gone pretty far down that tangent.
They ask if there's a little residual sugar. Do you know anything about the residual sugar on the wine?
It's possible. Everything, as you say, it's naturally fermented. What do you taste, Nelson? Because I can't taste it.
I don't taste it, but I know what you mean.
I think it's
Okay.
probably fruit weight that
Yeah,
sometimes comes
it is
across
a
like
mixture
that.
of fruit weight, and I think is also that sort of like somehow, I think if they ask you how much volatile acidity there is in there,
Yeah,
I would say there a solid 0.6. You know,
I think
is even
I think
more,
that's right.
even more probably.
I think when you're working with that much that kind of ripeness in the fruits, really long, slow fermentation, and yeah, I mean everything hand harvested, also destemmed. Destemming can introduce a bit of oxidation, so you do get a little bit more volatile and stuff like that. But yeah, so again, we're going to see a bit of a theme in the winemaking process. But it does seem for some reason that larger barrels are preferred. Long lees aging is preferred. So you're, about 500-liter barrels, Austrian kind of ovally ones. 18 to 24 months, but sitting on the lees, so not stirring. I don't know if it's showing today. Are you getting a bit of kind of flintiness on this one?
Yeah, no. For you know what, like apart of that, from the fact that I think that any Sauvignon Blanc from Styria, like after the Domaine Tement like explosion, I think is one of the most exciting as a starter. I think the Sauvignon Blanc in Styria is the most exciting thing that I can think of in the world of wine. I talk about it much more in these masterclasses, and I talk about it because I love it. I would love to do just a Styria masterclass. It's something that I really, really love. But I would say that, like there's this huge impact on minerality. There is, that sort of Austrian Styrian thing. It's a lighter style of Sauvignon Blanc. And I have to say, these guys for me is the perfect idea of a natural wine. It is true that it would be really hard to think of it as a Sauvignon Blanc, but if we concentrate on the glass and we start like focusing on, do we have the aromatics? Yes, we do. Are the aromatics in more than one, charter? Like, okay, do we have the green apple? We do. Do we have the stone fruit? Yeah. So we do have all the signs. Do we have the herbaceousness? Yeah. So we do have the sign of the grape, but on top of that, the way the flavors have conveyed, it is completely new. Like for example, I'm asking you guys who have the kit. Do you guys have ever tasted a Sauvignon Blanc that tastes like this, like in general? Let me know if you had like an idea in your mind. No, because this is my thing. When I tasted this, it is it on New Zealand? It might be because many people are actually going crazy for it. But you know what? There's another thing about wild fermentation, Michelle, that I saw around certain places. For me, wild fermenting just doesn't work. This is my point of view. I remember that I tried certain wines from certain areas, and I was like, man, I just think they don't have the right, they don't have the right bacteria properly. So I'm really curious of seeing to see what we're gonna do, because
Well, this is an interesting thing, because I think, for example, Jean Foyard, who's a very famous natural winemaker from Beaujolais, he started out by just his main thing was that the wines that are naturally fermented taste better. So he started out wanting to do a natural fermentation, and he converted to organic because he found that his natural ferments were not vigorous enough. And his friends who were getting good natural ferments very close by from actually the same hill in Morgon said, well, it's because we're not spraying anything on our vines that we have all of the yeast and the bacteria and all of that we need. And so that's actually how he converted to organic. And now he's like, one of the kind of mega stars of natural wine. Even though he didn't start out ideologically like this. He wanted to make better tasting wine, and that's what he did.
Yeah.
But let me just quickly answer this question from Carlo about whether wine can age only because of sulfur. So I'm not sure if anyone has said that wine can only age because of sulfur. I think everyone is always going to kind of factor in aspects like tannin, concentration, acidity. All of these things are always going to be part of the conversation when you're talking about ageability. But there are very many people who say, without sulfur, your wine is not going to be able to age. And I do think this is a misconception, because I think you're absolutely right that it's got to do with the stability and the élevage especially. And I think, a lot of the wines that, I mean, right now you're drinking a 2017 Sauvignon Blanc. So I don't know how many 2017 Sauvignon Blancs that you can pick up at the supermarket loaded with sulfur are going to taste like this today, are going to express so much. And I actually really like to, I have a bottle of this at home, and I almost opened it today, but actually I really like to age these wines because they taste amazing after a few years. So, and I tried it as an experiment. I'd never tried it before, but yeah, I opened the 2015 in the middle of last year, and it was just a sublime experience. It was absolutely incredible. And I think in that vintage, there was no or almost no sulfur added. That's the other thing. With the residual sugar, this would probably be fizzy if there was residual sugar, because it would have re-fermented, because his sulfur usage is so low. So
there's also another thing that sometimes people forgot about natural wines, though. That actually is one of my picks. Even when you produce a faultless natural wine, which is what Carlos said again also on the chat, there's one point extra that needs to be taken in affair, which is the point that when you have especially high level of Brettanomyces, volatile acidity, oxidation or reduction, aging can sometimes, and this is at least what I think, and we're not talking about wines like this, but sometimes, there are certain producers that, they're really dancing dangerously with that. And you might have, again, the key is actually the trust, because people trusted Soldera to keep the wine intact and age with wines with over 1 point of volatile acidity. But if you have other people that are experimenting with it, with aging, they can have the best pH, they can have the best tannins, the best structure, but at the same time, the wine can get completely gone if one of these elements sometimes takes in account too dangerously. And we had some experiences with real bottles, but I don't know what is your point on it. So I was curious to share these small experiences, especially in weird vintages, like if you try to open these, 2003 Italian wines, climate was really, really hot. And some of them, even the best winemakers, sometimes, you feel that the oxidation has taken over, and in other vintages, it just doesn't happen. So I don't know. I think that sometimes in natural wines, when we're talking also about vintages, you just need to put an extra attention to it. And, there are places like people usually never speaks about, vintages in New Zealand. We were talking about New Zealand. But most likely, if you have a natural producer in New Zealand, you might need to start taking into account, vintages way more seriously. So,
yes, I think that's really true, because I think there's very much so, like, for example, La Stopa, which you guys are going to try today. In 2002, they had an awful vintage. It was just like rainy, terrible. And the enologist from La Stopa was saying, we shouldn't make Macchiona this year, because Macchiona anyway always sees a lot of aging before release. And he was like, it's going to be too acidic, there's going to be no fruit, no concentration, so there's no point. But then Elena said, actually, no, let's make a small amount, and we'll just put it aside for at least 10 years, and then revisit it and see. And it was actually only last year that they released it. Obviously not the whole time was in barrel, it was in bottle for a long time, but they released it last year. And it's an outstanding wine. It's incredible. And it has this vivacity and energy to it. But of course it would have been awful if they had put it out in, 2002, I guess they would put out probably in, 2012 or something like that, based on how they usually release. But even then, it would have been far too acidic and not developed enough. So cool. Yes. Anyway.
Let's move on to more orangey stuff, because I wanted to do 2 whites, 2 oranges, and 2 red, just so we have, you know, because it's the most chatted thing around, right?
Cool. So Antonino Caravaggio. So he basically, I mean, his winery is, it still has a little tiny house there, which is the house he was born in and grew up in. I mean, his family has a historical kind of presence on the island, actually very well known for their caper production. They're amazing capers. Actually, if anybody has started ordering from Natura at the moment, you can get Nino's capers from Natura. I strongly advise it. I got some. They're amazing. But the island Salina is directly north of Mount Etna. So it's, you know, there's a group of islands there, Lipari, Stromboli, volcanic islands directly north of Mount Etna. Absolutely beautiful part of the world. And they're very known for their Malvasia, Malvasia delle Lipari, which is, and typically is made into a pasito, so a dried grape sweet wine. And that's very well known. They do make a little bit of Caravaggio, but we're interested in them because of using A, natural methods, and B, making dry wines because of that. Their sweet wines, they still have to add sulfur because it's, yeah, it's quite a lot of sulfur to maintain the sweet wines. But for the dry wines that they make, he's using a really amazing, you know, it's a tiny, really, I mean, his cellar is kind of about the size of my bedroom. It's just taller because he has to fit tanks in there. But yeah, he's just a completely, I mean, when we talk about authenticity and honesty, it doesn't get more than this. This guy is making wine, like, you know, next to the house he was born in. His vineyards are, like, you can see there where he's standing in his vineyard, you can see the sea just behind him. You can see the life in his vineyards. And when I visit vineyards, I always like to smell you know, the herbs and the other plants that are going around there, because it helps me conceptualize the wine and think about where it's from, and remember you know, the place I was. I don't know, I think part of what makes wine so kind of transporting is that smell is so heavily linked to memory. But in his vineyards, I didn't have to kind of bend down or pick anything. You could smell all of the herbs, the fennel, oregano, I mean, just everything growing. And it was just in the air. It was completely, you know, redolent with all the herbs and the plants that were growing there. And these grapes, I mean, the vines were completely in tune with their environment. So very much in this sense of the permaculture, the way that they had been set up was very much as part of, I guess, you know, a centuries-long tradition of grape growing in this region, where, you know, minimal work is done in this vineyard, and yet wonderful quality grapes are made. So part of the reason we picked this one was because we figured it would be the first orange wine for some people, and over here it's a short amount of skin maceration, relatively speaking. So it's about 3 weeks on the skins, which I guess, you know, in some red wines that's quite a long time. But with these varieties, I think it works because you have mostly Malvasia in the blend. So these powerful aromatic grapes really lend themselves to skin contact, because if sometimes when you get just a plain white wine made from really aromatic grapes, you know, it gets sickly, it gets overly heavy, and the texture that you get from the skin contact makes up for some of the acidity. At the same time, the other varieties is a mix of different local varieties, but including kind of the better known Catarato, Grillo. And these grapes already have this kind of zesty, lemony texture to them, which again, I think is just really well enhanced by a bit of skin contact. So I think, you know, even though he's working in this very kind of humble, and if you look at his surroundings and his cellar and everything, it all looks very rustic, but his wines come out with such a kind of effortless elegance, I think. Hopefully it's tasting like that today. What do you think?
No, first of all, we learned that you are a bon vivant, always traveling for work, eating capers, what a time, man.
Well, not right now.
With us so we can Now it's just because I can imagine that if the virus wasn't around, you would just, I would in a be like Tuscany or some stuff. No, I mean, you know what is the thing? Is that like, I'm going to say it, I used to be a huge fan of maceration. And then I drank so much orange wine, macerated wine, that I got bored of it. And I went as far to say that I do believe that most of the time, I think that maceration is one of those things that tends to flatten wine a lot. But I have to be honest, and there are certain varieties that seems that they are born to just obtain the maceration. Surely, this is one of them. And it's really weird because I don't know how you feel. I feel like that sometimes like maceration works in the two extreme sides, like, or you have a super aromatic varietal, or you have something that smells of literally one or two things, and then you enrich them somehow. Or you need to enrich them, or you need to tear them down,
Yeah.
And it is fascinating, though, that this wine is still, at least to me, I don't know, guys, let me know in the chat. For example, like, is a wine that has loads of complexity. We can tell there is a Malvasia. First of all, we can tell that sort of like really, how can I say, oriental aromatics. But the way the coating of the maceration works for it is absolutely exceptional. And I mean, this is a 7 pounds glass at 67. This is a solid 7 pounds for us, I would say. I don't know, guys, let me know, because I can feel, like there are some extreme cases like Geno from La Stoppa that you probably have drunk in one of my other master classes, but like this one is so elegant as well. Like he's not like rough in the face. It is a job well done.
Yeah. And here, I mean, you have 0 added sulfites. So this idea that your wine has to be dirty or funky or volatile or whatever because it's skin contact or because it's no added sulfites, I think, a wine like this can very quickly undermine this perspective. But yeah, I mean, I'd love to hear in the chat what you guys are thinking about this wine.
On this one, I have to say, I knew pretty much all the wines. This one is a complete Roman choice. It is fantastic. I was really looking forward to drink this one. Roman, so now there's a bit of a twist.
Yes.
Because like we should have the pheasant steers, but we thought of moving it for later. Let's do it in the natural wine way, right?
I think so. I think this is the interesting thing about skin contact wines in general, is that it's, like we were discussing before, it feels like when you start drinking skin contact wine, it feels like you have to start learning wine again. You get flavors that are not present in white or red wines, and you approach them differently as a category. So in this case, because we have two very different styles of skin contact wines, one with a light amount of skin contact, basically to boost the texture of the wine and give it a bit of structure where the acidity is missing. And then you have a style which is through and through designed from the beginning according to thousands of years tradition to make it a skin contact wine. It's a very different experience, and it's a richer, heavier, more powerful wine than the Cabernet Franc that we're about to drink. So for me, it makes perfect sense to drink this red first, and then the other one. And I would also advise, in case anybody has the other wine in the fridge, please take it out now, because
exactly.
Again, you want to drink it at cellar temperature.
Basically, we're moving now to the Thierry Germain's Saumur Champigny, guys, and then we're going to keep the pheasant steer for later. So that's a bit of a trick, because sometimes it seems really weird, but we're going to go a bit Burgundy style, but it starts always like with the reds before the whites. So we're
Jura as well, they do this, so sounds good.
Yeah, if they do it, we can do it.
Exactly.
So tell us more about. I mean, this is legendary, but I want to know
Thierry Germain. Yes. So Thierry Germain. So when we talk about quality winemaking, I think that's always where Thierry Germain's focus was from the beginning. He went and worked in Bordeaux at a few different chateaus, and then decided he wanted to get a different kind of expression of the Cabernet. So moved to the Loire Valley and spent a lot of time working with Charlie Foucault at Rougier, who became really a mentor to him. He really learned a huge amount at Rougier and really modeled himself, I think, at first on Charlie and what he learned from him. At the same time, the Loire Valley at that time, this area, Saumur-Champigny, was kind of seen as like not a very great vineyard area, but it became a birthplace for a lot of natural wine because of this, because the land was cheaper and because there was not already a strict idea of what wine was supposed to be like. You had a lot of interest, and then of course Nicolas Joly down the road all helped to kind of make this a hotbed for kind of forward-thinking winemaking. So Thierry Germain really caught the biodynamic bug very early and made it a strong focus of his winemaking and his farming. And he looks at it again in this holistic sense, raising his animals, keeping his farm as a working unit. And even with his wine, so right now this is the baby Saumur Champigny, basically because his higher up cuvées I think are absolutely stunning, but we didn't have anything with age, and I think it's a shame to drink those wines, especially in a kind of tasting like this, without the appropriate amount of age. So I think it makes a lot more sense if we go for the baby. But essentially, his winemaking method doesn't really change very much across his reds. The ones that are the babies and the ones that are the big ones all kind of have a similar winemaking method, but it's the terroir and it's the vine age that really makes the difference. Mostly, really, I would say it's the vine age, but so for the reds, he always destems everything except one which he puts in amphora. Sometimes he adds some stems, but usually we'll always destem. We'll have a short, relatively kind of short maceration, 2 to 3 weeks maceration. In this case, he uses a mix of stainless steel and oak vats. With his higher up cuvées, he'll use kind of huge food, like 1,500 liter food, and let them age for a bit longer. So over here, the élevage is only about 3 or 4 months. And so you get, what I think this wine still preserves and expresses is the purity of the fruit. I think I think Cabernet Franc, it can be very vegetal, it can be stemmy, it can be a little, tannins can be hard. And for me, again, I don't know how it's showing today, but for me, Thierry always kind of navigates very smoothly around these challenges of working with Cabernet Franc. And creates, a real purity of the fruit, a real recognizability, but without these hard edges. What do you think, Nelson?
You know what? Like, I'm just gonna be honest here. I'm not a Cabernet Franc drinker. I've never been, and it's one of those grapes that I tend to fuck it up most of the times in blind tasting because I don't generally drink them, and I don't know, like there are certain grapes that you don't have a connection. I started drinking it because Terry Candilis is one of the biggest, Saumur Champigny drinker. He loves whatever is Cabernet Franc in the Loire. And there's the thing that I always noticed is that Cabernet Franc, I think, is one of those grapes that is really adaptable to styles, in the sense that when a Saumur Champigny or a normal Cabernet Franc from Loire is natural, there's always this thing in which I can tell there is a Cabernet Franc, but the style itself, it's really different in a way, somehow. If you get what I mean, like a conventional Saumur Champigny usually wouldn't be as vibrant as this; it would be way darker. Mm-hmm. John, as you said, like, it is upfront, and Michel is really pure and bright. And for me, the thing is, like, again, this is with wine number 2. that example of that sort of like natural wine thing. You can tell it's Cabernet Franc, you can tell it's from Saumur Champigny, the way this kind of matryoshka coating, that kind of natural thing, these extra flavors, these extra terroir, I don't know what it is, you know, because like nobody knows. But there's that extra thing. There's that extra thing that maybe it takes it a bit away from what we will call, oh, this is a classic style. But is that extra bit worth it? In this case, it is. This is at least my take on it, and this is how I felt extremely strongly on wine number 2 and wine number 5, because so far we've been drinking wine number 1, which was somehow, you know, really up to the point. That's a Chablis, no deal, but we felt the minerality. Then we have this one and wine number 2 that were exactly my idea of natural wine. You feel the variety, you feel that extra thing on top, and then this natural wine coating, and then, you know, we're gonna feel a bit more about the orange wines later. But I think this is a great example to even like saying that sometimes we should even stop calling them natural wines. These are just great wines. That's it.
I think it's exactly that, you know, and I think sometimes when you talk about this something extra that you're getting with the wine after you get the varietal and you get the place and then you get something extra, I don't know if that's because it's natural or because it's a winemaker. You know, I think in a lot of ways, part of what attracted me first to natural wine is that, like, if you look at these people who are talking about how they're farming, who are paying attention to every leaf and every plant that's growing in their vineyard and every place they're going, it's maybe less, I mean, I care about, you know, I buy organic food and whatever for what it's worth, or I try to get meat from farmers that I know are doing good things because I care about that. But separately from that, you know, for a long time I didn't drink, you know, wine that was labeled organic or whatever because it was not good.
Right.
But
I knew.
But you know, in a way, it's about the level of attention to detail that's going on, you know. And I think Carlo was saying earlier that, you know, what wine said, it's about the attention and about the making of the wine. And for me, it could very well be that it's this extra attention, this extra focus, that I'm not making wine with a recipe book of this much MKBS and this much, you know, enzymes and this much powdered yeast and all of this kind of stuff. It's the fact that, oh, okay, I'm doing something a bit different. I'm doing something that is going to behave differently where I am. You know, my yeasts are going to behave differently. My grapes are going to grow differently. It's the sensitivity. It's that I know what's happening in my vintage. I know how I have to adapt to it. I know which ways I need to move to continue to make a wine that's expressive and meaningful. So I think sometimes the value is in the fact that someone is really paying attention. You know, I place value on the fact that people are working with environmental responsibility, but I think there's an additional value you get when it comes just to pure enjoyment of wine that comes from the fact that this person is paying attention to what they're doing, you know? And I think that's the hallmark, I think, for all great wines. I think you don't get great wines where somebody isn't paying attention to what's going on.
You know what it is? I always try to explain it in this way because it's a weird way of getting in there, but it actually helped me out through the days. Mostly, if you imagine like a family dinner, you surely need to have your parents, because that's the key. And I think of your parents as the great variety. Then you need surely to have, you know, all the grandmas, granddads kind of like reference, because you need to look at the past while you look at the future. And that's pretty much, you know, the terroir. But then, if you really want to remember, you need that fucked up cousin that is going to do some weird stuff and you're going to remember the dinner for the days to come. And that's for me that kind of a natural wine thing. I know that is a really bad and weird example, but most of the time, I think that most wines that doesn't have that extra bit, that is not only natural wines, it is also in great fine wines. It just gives you that kind of flavor that is going to make you remember them for the time to come. And most wines nowadays, I think they're made like, you know, as a pastry chef thing, you know, you just make the ingredients and then you just hopefully it's gonna work it out. But you know, it's that kind of you know, have you ever met a perfect person apart from me? I mean, no, that's it. So the major point is that like all these small, you know, faults and defects that we see are actually increasing the possibility of remembering that emotion for a tiny bit more. And it's just, as John was saying, it's just the cherry on the cake most of the time, you know, and because we are talking about great wines. So thank you very much for understanding these guys so well. We usually
Yeah.
like to have to put up fights, and the masterclass lasts 3 hours of me screaming stuff, and it's not really pleasurable. But yeah, let's go back. Let's go back to Orange, man.
Fantastic. Great. So, oh man, I always dread having to say the name of this wine, but
No,
so
there's no way.
we're
There's
going
no way, man. There's no way.
To Georgia. So this is a super interesting project. I mean, so Georgia has, as I mentioned briefly before, you know, thousands of years of winemaking history. Some of the oldest documented history of winemaking, and in particular, this tradition of making wine in kvepri, which are these massive amphora that are buried usually up to, you know, just the top is at ground level and everything else is underground. So that's your natural temperature control available for the winemaking. And this is a long running tradition in Georgia. As I said, about at least 4,000 years is documented, but it probably went on for longer than that. And in Georgia, most households will have vines and will have kvevi. They'll have like basically like out the back kind of a shed or a rough covering. Some people it's not covered, but for most people they'll have at least kind of a makeshift roof with all these holes in the ground. You know, it looks like manholes, and that's their house wine, quite literally. It's the wine that they make from their few rows of vines for their own family. And hospitality, eating together, toasts, drinking together, all of this is a massive part of Georgian culture. They're all about getting together, eating, drinking, and sharing food and drink together. And really, you know, this is a really huge central part of the culture. So it makes sense that every house needs a pretty steady supply of wine. But Georgia also was recognized for its ability to grow good grapes and to produce wine of high quality. And so the Soviets basically co-opted Georgia and said, you know, that's going to be our wine factory. They're going to produce all the wine for the USSR. And at this time, they then made it illegal for any commercial sale of the kvevi wine. So it really put this under threat. It reduced the kvevi winemaking to basically essentially only what people maintained in their homes, whereas the wine for the USSR was all sort of diverted to this more industrialized way of making wine, because you have, you know, a relatively small country making wine for the entire USSR then at that point. And so it really kind of put this tradition under a lot of strain, a lot of threat. And in any case, there was not very much kind of global recognition for this sort of winemaking. It was sort of within the USSR that people knew about Georgian kvevi wine and would look for it and all of that, but it stopped being made available for wider consumption. So our story here kind of begins with an American guy, John Verdeman, who's you know, a poet, an artist, a singer, a chef. He's a very kind of spiritual, very warm person. He's very enchanting. He's very kind of almost a magical person when you meet him. And when he was young, growing up in Michigan, he randomly in a record store picked up a record that was of Georgian traditional polyphonic singing. And it, you know, just blew his mind. And he resolved that day, he's like, you know, one day I'm going to go to Georgia, I'm going to meet these people and understand how they sing. And so he did. He went to Georgia, he traveled around, he fell in love with the food, he fell in love with the culture, he fell in love with a Georgian woman, and got
I heard
married.
the story before.
And settled there. And, you know, his house had land with some vines on it, and he, at that point, had no real interest in making wine. He was very occupied, you know, painting, doing paintings. He opened a small restaurant, and yeah, carried on with his art and his music, and was quite happy with that. But his neighbors were constantly after him. They were always saying, you know, you have very nice vines, you should make wine. You have vines, you should be making wine. And it was, you know, and he said finally one day he was out, he was painting in a field, and one of his neighbors was going by on a tractor and started yelling at him because his vines were ripening and saying, you need to start making the wine, you know? And so he said, okay, I'm going to try, but I'm going to try and do it properly. So he knew someone a Georgian who was making wine and who was really kind of digging into the history and into driving forward um, the winemaking culture, bringing back fairy winemaking to the world. And so John teamed up with him to do this. So all of the wines that they make are made in this traditional way, and they really, I think, have been responsible for opening up this category of winemaking to the world. So it's a super traditional winemaking way.
Yeah, this is the orange wine, guys. So for me, like this is a classic Georgian macerated wine. Unfortunately, as every time that I'm doing a masterclass, things are running for the 2 hours time, but I'm with Robin, is one of the biggest friends of mine, so we wanted to give you a bit of a family thing. Okay, that's another thing. It's not really that kind of stinky soft thing. I know what you mean. WSET is not going to help you probably in any of those wines, okay? I will think that most of what happens is that, like, I really felt the kind of, okay, I'm going to give you an idea. Imagine you are eating a brick. That's, for me, one of the best things, because it is salty, but it has that kind of like really bricky kind of flavors. And that's what reminds me the most of. And on the palate, you will have more of the like faint white flowers. Like imagine like you're smashing some flowers with a brick, and then you just put what is the result in a pan. That's pretty much.
See, again, I don't know how he's showing today, but the last time I tasted this wine, what really I have a very kind of visual way of relating these things. But for me, instantly, I felt like I was walking through like a spice market in Morocco or something. You know, it has this really...
That's exactly what it is.
Woody spices and crazy smells and all of this stuff. And that's very much what comes for me with these wines. And they really come alive with food. If you guys can, you know, save a little bit. First of all, if you save a little bit and leave it open for a while, it's going to transform.
It's going to change completely.
It's really alive. It's going to change a lot. But if you have it with a bit of food, especially food with kind of spices and stuff like that, and aromatic herbs and spices, that's where you really see the wine come alive.
Guys, we have 5 minutes to go through the next wine, unfortunately. Thank you very much for staying with us. It's great to see you guys enjoying it. I will go for another hour, but we need to leave the space for not Roman, but for Ronan later. So quickly, we'll go for La Stoppa. I'm just going to say one thing. If you heard the sentence, there are some hipsters around drinking natural wine, probably La Stoppa started the whole thing, I would say. So it's the classic natural wine. So Roman gave us through like a couple of minutes for the producer.
Yes, very quick. Okay, so Elena's father bought the estate from an architect called Gianfranco Ageno. He started working mostly with kind of Bordeaux varieties. But then when Elena came to work at the estate, her mom, her dad had passed away, her mom left. She went to Uruguay. And, and she was like, you've just left me here. I don't know anything about winemaking yet. And she said, yeah, but if I stay, then you'll just learn from me and you won't find your own way. So now you don't have a choice, basically. And I think that's exactly what she did. She replanted and refocused on the indigenous varieties to the region, and is constantly working on ways to make wines that express and work with the area that she's in. And that's very much, she does everything with this sensitivity, with this feel that we've been talking about. That's a really important thing for natural winemaking. When you can't control.
No, it's great. Like the thing is that like you got them all here, guys. You got like the volatile, you got the Brett, you got the ox. Michelle, please tell me that this is the favorite wine of your tasting, or is it not? Because every time, like if I would put some money, I would have said this is probably the one. No, it's not. It happens all the time though. Every time I'm trying to push towards this wine because you know what it is? I'll tell you this quick story. I remember first time that I did this one, this natural wine thing, I always thought that basically people are gonna like those kind of wines, natural wines that are super clean. And he said every time people are just loving, you know, the wines that are super, super extra gone, like super bred, super oxidized. And this is the super favorite most of the time. Most of the time, absolutely Stella. We had a problem with Roman, so his computer fell off.
Sorry, guys.
Oh, here we go.
Technical hitch.
I missed you. I missed you now. So that's so. This is the thing, guys. In this wine, you actually can feel the whole deal for me of natural wines. I have to be honest. I love this one. It's great. Even if you can feel all these kind of like wine faults, if you want to call them, in this instance, they all come together so naturally that it makes out for a style. Especially think about like food-wise. Think about how many things you can actually eat with this, and it's crazy. I don't know what you think, Roman, but for me, it's
yeah, 100%.
It's a deal. It's a deal.
I think it's again, yeah, you're right. It's absolutely more of a food wine. It's got that structure, it's got that weight, and yeah, so much complexity to it that you see different facets of the wine depending on what you're eating with it, which I think is just always a beautiful thing.
Guys, I'm gonna run through the last two bits. Sorry for this run through. I'm gonna ask Grant to give me a 5 hours slot every time. I just wanted to go through this really quickly. What is my point of view as a sommelier serving you natural wines? It is great that every single bottle is completely different, but sometimes it is such a dropout when the bottles are extremely expensive. Sometimes when you buy Nicolas Joly, you have maybe a case, you have two bottles that are like probably the best wine you'll ever try, and the other one can be like half decent. And it happened, and you know it, and I know it. So there's no deal in saying it. And same with some Emilio Pepe sometimes, you know, this with La Stoppa. So it does happen sometimes that this bottle variation, and it's not that the wine is bad, it's that some bottles are so good that sometimes like it's really hard to go back to just a normal great fine wine, because we can reach some points of flavors that are literally something that you never tasted before, and is literally incredible. Even if you think about Chateau Le Puy in Bordeaux, the flavors that you can get out of those bottles, but sometimes you open them and they're just like great Bordeaux, and you wonder where are like the things that I tried, and it's like this bottle variation, which is amazing as sometimes a bit destructive. Stories sometimes for me are more compelling. We've heard Roman talking. I never got bored. You know, like when we had some stories about Bordeaux, it's like, you know, we had, okay, in Burgundy, I'm the cousin of the father of the daughter of that guy. And in Bordeaux, it's pretty much, yeah, we sold the chateau 5,000 times and then Chanel bought it. A great question is really terroir more important than varietal? We drank some wines today that sometimes you have the focus on the variety and sometimes you have the focus on the terroir. It is a great question. You know my answer, which is varietal, but it is my view. Okay, so the point is that like sometimes I like just to think about it. What is terroir? Why this wine smells like this? Is this the proof that even a single meter changes something? And even if we will technically never know, it is good to have a chat about it. And this is what 67 Palmali is for just making us chat about those things. And are these wine-making mistakes, are they complexity, or are they just mistakes? And this wine from La Stoppa is the perfect example. For me, these are not mistakes. They're creating a style, and this style is so versatile in so many things, right? But in certain cases, maybe if it will be another producer, I don't know, or if it will be something else, I will probably call them a mistake. So how much of my love for the wine are coming into account at this point? And another thing, are just people jumping on the bandwagon? Is this thing about like, oh, I'm natural? I am strongly on the point that I think that at least more than 50% of natural wine producers are a bit bandwagon jumpers. So this is where, you know, the trust comes in. Every time I buy wines from Le Cab, I know that they are taking care of that side as well. And it's something that it shouldn't be taken for granted. Because I see people just, even suppliers, just taking a natural wine because we need to have it. But having care, like the care that you need, is like the wine. If you want to make a clean, natural wine, you need more time. The same thing if you are a supplier. So thank you guys for the job you're doing. You're absolutely fantastic, Roman. Now, the 5 things that I now know about natural wines. Guys, as conventional wines, there are good and bad natural wines. The bad one smells like shit. The low sulfites might help you to feel better the day after, but is not the official excuse to drink 20 bottles in one go. Absolutely, guys. I've been to many, many dinners in which people are just like, oh my God, I feel bad because I drank one conventional wine. No, man, we just drank 20 bottles in 3. And that's why we feel like this, okay? Natural wines, if they're good, can age a lot. We drank a 2010 La Macchiona, guys. And it seems like a baby to me. It's got so much aging. And because we drank wine loads of the times, we assessed really well the potential of this. There's so much potential. This Thierry Germain can go for ages. Guys, it's not a momentary trend, okay? It's a movement that looks towards an healthier or respectful future. And I do believe this 100%, okay? And maybe some things are going to change. I would like not to talk about natural wines, but just about great wines. But we need to remember there is a political stance that we're taking sometimes. And if I'm going to root for someone, as you've been seeing in my Barolo Masterclass with Ferdinando Principiano, I might going to root for these guys. Some of the great wines in the world are natural. Emilio Pepe is natural. Nicola Jolie is natural. The Boscareto from Ferdinando Principiano, it is natural. And this is a point that I truly wanted to make. Roman, it's time for us to go. I don't know what I'm going to do with the rest of my days. I wanted to thank you so much. Guys, I wanted to thank you for staying with us for so long and going out with our shenanigans. And because this has been a friend reunion, basically. We haven't seen each other for a long time. So we're just like taking an account. We've just been chatting and you've just been seeing us chatting about stuff. But Roman, thank you very much for the job that you have done for us, and Le Cave for, selecting those amazing wines. Ladies and gentlemen, I am Nelson Pari. I was born stupid. However, I will not die thirsty. Natural wines forever. #67 from home, and I'll see you tomorrow. Ciao, guys.
Ciao, everybody. Thanks very much, everyone.